All right. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? I hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Today is going to be Ranger Review Day. Now, I have a lot to talk about. This is going to be a longer video. I will do a summation and overview. We'll do a deep dive into all the skills, my perspective on that, and then we'll talk as a whole as to what the Ranger is, what I think the Ranger should be, where I think it's lacking, and feedback overall that I have. I want to provide a couple prefaces in this video, though, before we dive into it and we get super nerdy with you guys. I want to be clear that this is an alpha, and we are looking at an archetype at level 25 of an overall of 50. So all of the skills and passives are not yet worked out. We have to understand that. We have to also understand that the augments don't exist. And so although this is a Ranger archetype, in the future, the Ranger can be combined with a Cleric, it can be combined with a Rogue, it can be combined with a Fighter, all of the other archetypes to create a specific class. And so some of the things that I think may be lacking may be coming on down the road when iteration and improvement and specialization comes online with the classes. So I understand all this. Hopefully you guys understand this. This is just a critique. This is just, I still think this is important to talk about because some of the underlying issues that I have with Ranger are more thematically based, and I think it's going to have a bleed over effect for when augments come online. And I'll talk about that later on in the video as well. So let's do an overview. Let's talk about what the Ranger is and what it does. Obviously, it is a ranged class. You basically specialize with range-based abilities on this archetype. Currently, right now, in medium and large-scale PvP, it's pretty solid. I would say it's pretty solid, typically mainly because vines are very effective. Vines are an AoE root that will have some status effect. It also keeps people locked down in a high damage meta. Locking people down like that basically means that if you get stuck in that for too long, you're basically dead. And so Ranger has its place. Obviously, it's not as good as Mage. I know there's going to be some people that are going to come in the comment section and be like, yeah, but it's not Mage. It's not Mage. I know it's not Mage, but it's also not Fighter as far as relative effectiveness in small scale and large scale PvP. In medium scale and large scale PvP. In small scale PvP, it's got its effects. There's some things I want to have it lean into a little bit more. There's some specializations for fighting specific archetypes that you can do, but it kind of feels like an uphill battle versus a lot of different archetypes in a 1v1 situation. Not that it's bad, but it's just that there's some things that are completely missing from the kit right now that kind of feel like you're just fighting uphill a little bit. So that's overall my impression. It is good. It is useful. I find a lot of use for it when we're in wars and whatnot. It is fun to play. The animations are good. But yeah, let's dive into the skills and their overall effect. So let's start at the bottom. Number one, we have our Scattershot. A Scattershot, spread of projectiles. This is a skill that can, depending on your ammo, it imbues different effects. So if I come over here and I pull a creature, it is a way to gain different status effects. And so you can have quick fire, or you can do a concentrated focus, and you can narrow it down. And basically, even in a tab target game, that is still a skill shot. And so I like it quite a bit. The one thing that it's lacking is there's not a ton of verticality to it. So wherever it fires, it kind of shoots in that straight line. It doesn't go up or down too much, which I personally think is okay. It's a skill shot style ability, and because it's more of a skill shot, I like the fact that you need to actually utilize skill in order to use it. So it's not just a kind of a point in the area and it goes and homing missiles in onto one specific person. But it's got its specific effects. Like I said, it works very well with different barbs. It hits pretty hard. It's a solid skill. It's one of my favorite ones to use. Disengage. This is your back flip or front flip or whatever. You can have a passive put in place to where you can front flip or backflip depending on where you go in the direction. Sometimes it bugs out, and so when I'm trying to front flip, I'll be front flipping and then it'll put me right back to where I was. This specific skill is pretty buggy right now. This is part of the issue that you have with the Ranger, is some of the defensive skills are just having issues. I know it's an alpha. I know that there are a lot of skills on a lot of different archetypes. Tanks, I understand, but for this one specifically, it's tough to gauge the overall survival of the Ranger when you have a skill like this not always working very well, when it's always putting you back in the same spot. It is a good skill. It's good for disengage. If somebody's really close to you, it will root the enemy. So it does work very well in that department, but it just needs some fixes, and it needs some cleanup overall on its bugginess in order for it to be a better defensive skill. Headshot, this is my favorite skill on the entire Ranger archetype. It is your execute. You do a ton of damage. When you're at lower health, you do even more damage. There's nothing better than getting somebody to low health. They decide to roll dodge, jump away, like thinking they're out of range, and you just hit them with a high damage headshot and just absolutely nuke them. So I really enjoy this one. It has some good synergy with silenced targets. It has some synergy versus dazed targets. We'll talk more about those different status effects later, but overall it is a very, very good skill. So I can actually show you guys what it does here. Come on, there we go. So if we come in here and we get this guy to low health, status effects on him. And now that he's at low health, we'll wind that up. And that's the execute, the red arrow. So it hits hard. It hits even harder at lower health. It is very, very good. And now we start getting into our armaments. And so we have our enhanced armament here, the weight. You have this one. When you hit somebody with a finisher, your extended finishers, your barrage or a scattershot. Barrage we'll talk about here in a little bit, but scattershot's the first skill that we were talking about. They can become snared. So if you put this on, it basically snares, it slows people down. You're a mobile archetype. It's really good for kiting heavier mobs. Some mobs, they just literally can't even hit you. The next one, enhanced armament barbs. Same thing, finishers, extended finishers, barrage, and scattershot. This can proc bleeding, and so you're going to do more damage. And then my favorite PvP one, concussion. Enemies hit by your finishers, extended finishers, barrage, or scattershot have a 50% chance to become dazed. And so you can combine your status effect with these in order to do different things. And so there's a little bit of synergy here with a few different skills. I'll go into it a little bit. I'm running the bleed one right now because I'm fighting NPCs, but if you come in here, I currently have it equipped. You'll see the bleeding status effect, and then we'll go into barrage as well. But barrages are spammable. It helps proc status effects. I will pick up that loot, guys, I promise. Our single target status effect ability. So these are our light attacks. This can proc our bleeding because of the barbs that we have. If we do this, it also procs bleeding. If we run our roots with this, we can also proc hemorrhaging once the creatures are bleeding, and you see it does a ton more damage there. You see that like it was so much quicker for me to kill them there because I stacked a bunch more status effects with that specific barb. If I come in here and I change the barb out and I put it to weighted, and I go over here and then we confirm changes, of course, and then we buff up with our weighted barbs, what you'll see is a very similar thing. You'll see that they become snared right away, and now they're a little bit slower, a lot harder to get to us, and we can basically play the game of just staying out of range. So we can combine our roots with our snares and really keep big mobile enemies like this away from us. And so it's very effective for that. Obviously, you can have an AoE effect with it as well. You have a 50% chance on abilities. And so I can also combine it with Scattershot and go like this. And you see we got lucky, we got 2 snares there. But you can imagine a situation where you have 4 or 5 NPCs in front of you. You hit them with the quick scatter shot like that, or an AoE one, and you have a chance to proc snared on everything and kind of keep everything away from you. And then finally, if we take off the last barb and then we put concussion on, concussion is, I think it's the better PvP one right now, just in general with how silences kind of work. But you can proc your status effect. You'll see it'll proc dazed. Maybe it won't proc dazed. There, now we have our dazed, and so now if we hit him with our lightning, we have silenced the creature and it can't hit us for a certain amount of time. And so that is a very effective skill. You start combining a silence with roots and whatnot. And most classes only have like 1 CC break. It becomes a situation where they have to pick and choose your poison on what you hit with later. So that's my favorite one, like I said, for PvP. For PvE, it just really depends on what I'm fighting. If I'm fighting a bunch of ads that don't do a ton of damage, I'll use the barbs that do bleed damage. If I'm fighting some ads that can really nuke me, and they're like the single target cleavers, I'll use the weight one because yes, it's going to take a little bit longer to kill them, but I know that they're not going to touch me. Now, into the hunts. I have some issues with the hunts. They work the way they're supposed to and everything, but the problem is the current issue with the hunts is that there's not many good choices. You have the Hunt of the Bear, and this is the one that imbues yourself with increased physical mitigation. Only one hunt may be active at a time. This is only one type of mitigation. I'm not saying that it's bad, but because it's only physical mitigation, when you're grinding mobs or you're in POIs, yes, you can leverage this. Like you could do something like this and stack more into mana defense, like more magical defense, because you have physical defense from over here. You can do stuff like that. Damage is so high that you don't necessarily have to run one of the other hunts, but I would like to see this like have a lesser effect in more overall defense. But I find myself not using this too much in general because typically when you're grinding mobs or you're out in different areas, you're getting attacked by different things. And yeah, specialization is just kind of goofy right now. But it's got its place. It's just not something that I really run. Hunt of the Tiger. 10% increased critical damage. Starting out, our critical damage is very low. Crit strike chance is very low, like 20%. I'm over 30% now. It will increase as we get higher up, but until I get a higher crit chance, I don't think this is really worth running. I'm currently running Hunt of the Raven. Increased physical penetration. We pierce armor a little bit more. I think this will have more benefits as we get advanced further on and get better and better gear. I just don't think it's like super great right now. And then we get into the marks. I think marks need a rework. I'm going to rip the Band-Aid off. I'm going to be blunt and honest with you guys here. I think that they are effective. I do think that they are useful. The problem is they all share the same cooldown. And so you have these different types of marks. You can only really have one active at any point in time. And so you can't really, so like as a hunter style ranger that you're doing here where you're marking different targets, it'd be kind of cool if you could use different marks at different points in time. So if you can activate one mark for a burst combo, that these skills already have a cooldown, so you're only getting a specialized effect at that point in time. Having another mark later in time for different effects, even though your skills are on cooldown, would be kind of cool. But because they all share the same cooldown, you only really pick one. And so you have Mark of the Tiger, increase your crit chance versus targets by 25%. That's the one that I choose. You can do Mark of the Bear, reduce target mitigation by 25%. That works just fine as well. And then you have Mark of the Raven, which you can have 33. It's basically like a little proc damage thing. So you hit it every time you hit them with something. This scales up on damage based on the target's missing health. And so you could choose which hunts you want. The hunts coincide with siphoning regeneration here. Each time the target of your regeneration effect, I don't know why that's not on there. I was messing with stuff yesterday for that's why. I took off the wrong passive last night. Anyway, what this does is each time the target of your regeneration effect deals damage to your marked target, they gain increased health and mana regeneration equal to 5% of the damage dealt for 5 seconds. This is a passive that came in a few weeks ago. Overall, Ranger is one of the hardest to sustain archetypes in the game. I think from a ranged perspective, this does make sense. Like if you're operating at range, you're dancing out of people's ways, and you're doing high damage at a distance, and your overall mitigation is just being kitey and mobile. It does make sense from that perspective that a ranger would lack somewhere, and that somewhere would be mana regeneration. Like sure, you're fast, you're mobile, like this is what they want the archetype to be, but you're going to lack a little bit in this department, because if you had infant sustain, you could just pepper everything from range off of cooldowns. You could kite, you can move away. Making choices for a ranger in that department does make sense. You don't want to have people having all of the advantages. So I totally get this, but overall regeneration on ranger just feels bad as a whole. It like the overall class just doesn't sustain very well, especially relative to other archetypes. Damage is so high for all archetypes across the board that, if you're like a bard, or if you're a cleric and you're fighting a ranger, if you can survive a decent amount of time, they're going to have a really hard time sustaining in the fight. And so as the fight drags out longer and longer, your chances of winning are just go higher and higher. Like the ranger really needs to pepper that damage in early, get some skill shot combinations, get some burst in, and that doesn't always work so well. And so my point is having more marks able to operate off of their own individual cooldowns would buff this a little bit more. So if I could hit Mark of the Bear or Mark of the Tiger on something, and then I have 5%, I could get this regeneration, a small amount of regeneration for health and mana for a little bit. This would be really nice. And then I could hit another one, and then I could have a little bit more health and mana regeneration. I'd still have to take a skill off my bar. I would still have to mess around with those things, but I would get a little bit more mana and health regeneration in these fights, which I think would be pretty valuable. But that's my critique of the marks. Some people don't like the overall skills. I don't mind them. I just wish I could use more, I guess, is my thing. And then we have Snipe. I think Snipe's fine where it's at. It is a high damage skill. It hits very, very hard. So if we come in here and we'll do our full ranger thing now that it actually kind of works. We'll hit our cloak here. If we come in here and we wind up our Snipe and then we hit with our Mark of the Tiger, we're going to hit very, very hard. I don't even think I have food on right now. But yes, it is a very good open. It hits really hard. The downside to running Snipe is it has a long cast time. And if you use Snipe at the wrong point in time, if you're standing in front of somebody's face, like a fighter or a tank, and you're trying to wind up Snipe, it's not going to go well for you, right? It's not going to go well for you at all. You are probably going to die. And so you have to utilize your snares, you have to utilize your roots, you have to utilize your silences in order to pull this off. And so if you're in a 1v1 situation, if your cloak doesn't go off, or if they can see through your cloak for a variety of different Alpha 2 reasons, you're going to have to wait for them to burn their CC break. You're going to have to wait for them to be silenced or rooted so that you can just get this skill off. If you utilize it at a bad time, it's very punishing. And so this is one of those, yes, it has a cast time. Yes, it hits really hard, but it is easy for... it's easy to be punished while in this. And so I think the risk versus reward for this specific skill is pretty good. Bear Trap, I like Bear Trap quite a bit. I do a lot more solo and small scale PvP. I think in a small scale situation, Bear Trap can be quite nice, especially in duels and whatnot, like basically putting them down, kind of camping the trap a little bit, making them burn their CC. I think this can be very effective. It also can be very ineffective. You know, in larger scale situations, you can have the passives to where you'll have 3 bear traps total. It really becomes a pain in the ass for a ranger to deal with vines plus bear trap plus silences plus snares. Like sometimes it's like a game of chase the rabbit, and you just feel like you could never catch up. Currently in the high damage meta, you don't really get to see the utilization of traps the way you'd want to, because everybody dies before you can really wear on people with bear traps. Like everybody just gets nuked almost immediately. And so this is a useful skill. I don't think I would change anything on it at all. I just think that once the meta changes, this specific skill will change with it. That's all I got to say. That's all I got to say about that. That's my personal opinion. Then we have Thundering Shot. This is a pretty good skill. This is our lightning skill. If we run our silence barbs like we are right now, this is what I showed earlier. When we proc our dazed, I said when we proc our dazed, we can hit our lightning shot right here, and you see now he is silenced. And so that is one way in order to utilize that. It's very effective in that regard. It's a good skill. It's a good skill. You can have a passive that where it does AoE. It's a nice skill. I keep saying it. I have no notes on this. I like it quite a bit. Lightning Reload. Lightning Reload basically gives you a reset on specific cooldowns. So let's say we burn all of our cooldowns on all of our specific skills. If I hit Lightning Reload, you see that my Scattershot here down at the bottom is refreshed, and now I have another Scattershot to fire before it goes on cooldown again. And so it allows us to utilize different abilities. And so you see it works for Snipe, Barrage, Headshot, Scattershot, Raining Death, and Thundering Shot. And so if you have a character that's at low health and you want to, hit with a headshot because you want to finish them off, you hit with a headshot, it doesn't crit. They don't die. You can hit Lightning Reload. You can hit them with another headshot and potentially, do even more damage because they're at even lower health. If you're trying to proc status effects, right? And your status effect has a 50% chance and your RNG sucks, right? You've hit your barrage, you've hit your scatter shot, and they're still not bleeding or they're still not dazed or whatever. You can hit this again and have another chance to proc your status effect before you go into your other combinations. That's very useful. It's a very useful utility skill. No notes. I think it's good. The best skill in the game for Ranger is Vine Field. It's really not close. This is such a powerhouse in PvP. It is very powerful. It is literally powerful everywhere. Like you should not leave without vines. If you are not running vines on a Ranger right now, I don't know what you're doing, brother. I really don't know. I don't know what your plan is. But yes, you should absolutely. That's a joke. You guys can do what you want. Obviously, I'm not going to tell people how to play. Of course, I would never do that. But what I will say is what vines do with the bleeding barbs is they will proc hemorrhaging, which is even more severe bleeding. And so if we come up here, you'll see we're fighting this Ash and Flame guy. Once we get a bleed proc on him, we can hit our Vine Field, and he gets rooted, he gets snared, he gets hemorrhaged, and now he's just bleeding, and now he's dead. And so, yeah, it is a very, very nasty thing for that reason. It combines a couple status effects. Obviously, if other people bleed the target and then you hit them with that, it will do the same thing. You will proc hemorrhaging on all bleeding targets, so you don't even need to be running the bleeding barbs in order to get that effect. Yeah, it's very good. It has a lot of control in PvP, getting into pushing into a group, getting out of a group. Like if you're at a choke point and your group needs to escape, you can drop the vine field. That gives you guys time to disengage and get distance. And so oftentimes in our groups, one of our rangers will be running the offensive push in thing. If we're starting to get flanked, our other rangers will be dropping the, okay, time to get the fuck out, drop this to, you know, get the distance type of thing. And so best skill for a ranger, hands down, really not even close. Up higher, we have a lot more utility skills. Party Stride. Party Stride is very effective. This is an AoE 10% speed buff. I basically, the reason this passive went away is I'll put Party Stride on, I will buff my entire group, and then I'll go back and then I will equip my passives once again. Normally I equip this one, but last night I was in a rush and I equipped this one and I forgot to take it off. Please don't judge me, but Party Stride is very effective for that reason. But yeah, it's only to be used sparingly. Airstrike. I have a lot of things to say about Airstrike. It doesn't do bad damage, but I want to explain why it's not currently very good. Okay, so if we come over here and we're lining this up, we're hitting everything, and we want to hit them with an airstrike, right? Airstrike will go over the top. It's one of the coolest animations in the game. It really is. It is freaking awesome. It looks great. It's got really good mobility. I don't really use it offensively. I don't really use it on a rotation. Not too often. I use it for line of sight. I use it for mobility. This is another mobility skill for me. And so it has that type of utility to where it does a little bit of damage. We're going to wait for our skill to come off of cooldown. This is one of the ones that doesn't share the lightning reload cooldowns, as you can see. But if I wanted to get up here, you see I can't climb up. I can use this skill to traverse elevation. Now, sometimes this does work and then I could get up here, but this one has a little bit more height. And so I like to use this to get on different elevation. This is a good line of sight ability, and it's good for that reason. And so that's why it doesn't come off my bar. Where it doesn't work in PvP is in medium, large scale PvP battles. You're not going to be bouncing over a pile of people and then going into the enemy. You're not going to be piling into the enemy in the current state of the ranger. And so oftentimes the skill doesn't really get utilized much unless you're kiting or traversing. Same thing with pulling a bunch of mobs. You know, there may be situations to where you don't want to bounce over them. You got an entire pile of people right here, and for whatever reason, you know, it's on cooldown right now, guys. I'm sorry, but let's say you got 5-10 enemies here. Do you really want to airstrike into the pile of them? You know, and now you're pulling a bunch of stuff over here. You may want to just back up. And so I'm not saying it's a bad skill. I would say that I would like it to have a little bit more of a rework. Like if it's going to be a damage skill, I'd like to see it potentially do a little bit more damage. It looks so cool, but I feel like its overall effect on the vast majority of PvP battles, PvE battles, is just really lacking. It's just really lacking in that department. It's more of a mobility skill for me. Raining Death. This is our AoE ability that literally does that. It rains death. If we go over here and we go to find something to kill. Sorry, I thought they'd come off of cooldown a little bit quicker here. Basically, that's what the skill does. It's got a specific range, but it's AoE. You typically, I'll combine it with this. I'll lock people down. You can hit lightning reload. And we can go into here, and it does a pretty good amount of damage. It's a really quick AoE skill as an opener. Depending on what I'm fighting, I'll rotate out Raining Death and traps personally. Other people may disagree, but yeah, It really depends on what you're fighting. It really depends on what you're fighting. Mob pulling, Raining Death is very nice, obviously. But yeah, it's got its place. It provides a stack of Wounded. Wounded is very nice, obviously, for a variety of different reasons. It's a good skill. Nothing else to say. Call of the Wild. This is our snare removal. Chilled status effects, stuff like that. So if we get marionetted, if we get CC'd, we can break those things. And so I don't know if there is a specific NPC out here that will give us a status effect, but if we hit that skill, it's right here. It's got a 30-second cooldown. We have a little bit more mobility. We break our CCs, and we are able to get out and, yeah, immune to all movement impairing effects for 8 seconds. And so literally we hit that, we can backflip out of here, we can arrow barrage up to a higher elevation. We have an 8-second period with a lot more movement speed to do some things about having that movement speed. So very good skill, very good for that reason. You want to have the passive here. Call of the Wild breaks all disabling effects on the caster. So until you get this, you can't, get out of snares and roots. You have to have this passive in order to do so. So very, very good skill. Camouflage. I had so many other things to say about Camouflage before this last week because it really wasn't working. And a lot of the issues with Ranger is the fact that this skill just doesn't work very well. You see my bow doesn't disappear. My shoulder pads don't disappear. Before this weekend, this literally worked maybe 10 to 20% of the time. It almost never worked. And so it was one of those things where it just wasn't effective. And even when it did work, it only worked for people in render distance. And so we can see as far as we can see. Anybody that can see us, like that person that's up there, I don't know if you guys can see that way off in the distance on the mount. There's a person up there on the mount. But we can see as far as they can see us from where they're at. And if they were out of render distance and we put camouflage on, when they came in to see us, camouflage would not work. And so there's a lot of issues with how camouflage works as a whole. But when it does work, it is a very powerful opener. It is a very powerful defense. And so I don't want to talk too negatively about the Ranger's defenses when two of the biggest defensive skills for Ranger don't work very well, right? Like this defensive kit could be very, very good if things just worked consistently. And I think tanks would say the same thing with their chain pulls. I think a lot of archetypes would say the same thing. Like, we're just in an alpha state and some things don't work very well. And so when you look at this, it does work very well. It is a very nice opener when it does work. It does hit very, very hard. And like I said, I don't even have food on right now. And so it's just one of those things where it's very good for what it's trying to do. And when it's working. But even now in the current state, like, not all my pieces disappear. And there's still just some animation things. Like, you can still see, name bars above people's heads when they're camouflaged. I'm holding out full judgment on this until I get a little bit more testing. Thorns, they're okay. They're all right. I mean, it's definitely a buff worth having. Obviously, it's a like you put the buff on your bar for a reason. But yeah, I don't think it's amazing or anything. But I mean, yeah, it's worth having, in my opinion. So anyway. There's not much else to say. When people hit you, you can put this on other people. You can put this on your tank. That's been kind of funny. I've accidentally flagged up my tank in the past because I put this on them, and yeah, it was highly amusing. But there's some bugs with this. It also has a 10% chance to apply bleeding, which is nice for hemorrhaging and whatnot. So definitely worth having on your skill bar. Strider, this is your single target movement speed passive. You hit this once. And it goes, you get 10% more movement speed for 15 minutes. So, and the best part is you can put it on your mount. If you look up top, it says, my mule here now has 10% more movement speed. And so Rangers have the added benefit of running a slightly slower mount and still being the fastest, archetype in the game on a mount because they have that 10% bonus. I can also, like I said, apply Party Strider to two people, and I can apply it to their mounts as well while they're on it. So it's very nice for caravans. It's very nice for allowing people to move a little bit faster. And so it is a nice skill. Like I said, it's got a very long cooldown, a very long effect. So you kind of just set it and you forget it. Regeneration. This is not very good. I almost don't. There is a very small difference in regeneration being on you and regeneration being off. Like, it is a very small amount of regen that you get. I run it because I need all the regeneration I can get. It's worth having. It's worth equipping as a passive, I guess, because once it's on. But it doesn't provide a whole lot. It really doesn't. When I put it on other people, I've done, these are very anecdotal tests, of course, but I put it on people and I've been like, hey, how's your sustain feeling now? And they're like, I don't notice a difference. What did you do? And it's like, yeah, exactly. I put regeneration on you. You didn't even notice. And so I'm not saying you need to have it to where you need to have infinite sustain, but I wouldn't be against this being a little bit more effective as a whole. I don't think it's very good. So that's my personal opinion. Overall, the toolkit, like I said, is pretty good. It's a pretty good toolkit. These are my unbiased, analytically looking at the overall kit perspective. What's missing? What I think is missing from the Ranger archetype as a whole is I don't think its identity is very good. I don't think that its current state really lends itself well to augmenting later on. And let me explain. I already talked about augments earlier on in this video. What you're going to do is you're going to have an archetype. You're going to combine it with another archetype to create a specific class. And so your rogue is going to be combined with another rogue. You can combine a ranger with a fighter, stuff like that. And the secondary archetype is supposed to augment the initial one. So you'll still be a ranger if you're a ranger first, but if you're a fighter, you might have more damage. If you're a cleric, I'm sure the first thing you guys think of when you think cleric secondary, you're probably going to have healing passives, right? When you think a tank secondary, you're going to have a little bit more mitigation, right? The current state of the Ranger is there's nothing that really leans well to have those like known passives. And I'm not saying that's how it's going to work when the augments go live, but you can kind of have an idea with other archetypes. If you think rogue, you think rogue, you're like, okay, I'll probably have, maybe I'll have some movement speed, maybe I'll have some critical damage, maybe I'll have some backstabbing damage, because that's what rogues do, right? And so you see all these different archetypes, and they have very fleshed out power fantasies, like you know what they're supposed to do. The current state of Ranger, I don't know what that specifically is, and that's my biggest issue. Like, it functions well. It is more effective than most archetypes in PvP. It is definitely not bad in that department. I think people really can't complain in medium and large scale with what a Ranger provides. And in small scale, when Cloak works, it is very bursty. So it's definitely got its uses, it's got its pros, and it's got its cons. It's just not the powerhouse or the juggernaut that the mage is. And so a lot of people will basically be like, well, yeah, it's no mage, and so you should run a mage. I get it, but what happens when mage gets adjusted? I don't think Ranger's in a bad spot from a performance perspective. The issue is the power fantasy. And so my overall thought on Rangers is a little bit skewed here. I want to be clear that when I think of Ranger, I think of like Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. There's a very specific part in the book where they're chasing after Merry and Pippin, and they're running away from or they're running to like 40 different orcs, and they're trying to chase them down to save their friends, and they run for 3 straight days. And Aragorn in the books is a ranger. He's a ranger, and so his entire thing is he can be melee. He can obviously utilize range as well, like other rangers. But in that sense, my thought on rangers is more about speed, mobility, and endurance. You know, being able to endure, being able to have the stamina to stay in a fight for a lot longer. That's my vision on what a ranger is. You look at army rangers, they're the exact same thing. If you know anything about army ranger training, you know that they're literally up for 20, 22, 24 hours at a time, working all day. And that's that same endurance thought process. And so when I think ranger, I think endurance. And so it would make a lot of sense that if you built an archetype around something like endurance, when you have augments come on later down the road, and you're like, hey, I want a ranger archetype. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit of mobility, and I'm going to have sustain. Like, this archetype gives me these specific things. And that's something that you could latch onto for an archetype belief. And that's not the route that they're going, which is more than okay. I just wanted to bring that up because I think this makes sense for this discussion. They're going more of the ranged style ranger, which is okay. Like, all these skills provide range. You don't really play a melee ranger in the current state of the game. I hope future augments down the road allow you to play a more mobile class in melee range, and I think ranger could supplement that very well with specific abilities. We might get that with classes, and so I want to be clear with that these things might change later on down the road. But currently, the level 25 version of ranger operates ranged abilities, and so I then compare it to historical other rangers through other games, through other video games, through movies, through TV shows, and the things I think about are like Hawkeye from the Marvel movies. I think of Robin Hood. I think of, Arrow from the TV show. Any type of TV show or movie or anything like that, Legolas, we'll go back to Lord of the Rings, right? Any of these characters, they're all specialized in things like acrobatics, accuracy, precision, and just lethal effect. And so if you watch any of these characters, they're always very accurate with single target abilities. They're really showcasing their skill. Like you look at Hawkeye, and he's in the modern age, and he's still using a bow next to freaking superheroes because he's so good with the bow. That's the entire thing. It's like, he's so good with this that he's not as good as them, obviously, like there's entire memes about this, but he's effective because of, like, despite handicapping himself with a much inferior weapon. Robin Hood, Robin Hood, obviously very effective for the same reason. Legolas, all these different characters function in very similar ways with single target skills and abilities that do things. And the Ranger's current kit is better suited for AoE. And so there's this disconnect between the current strengths of what the Ranger is and what a Ranger typically is. And so when we talk about Ranger in PvP, oh wow, my citizenship finally worked. Well, when we look at PvP, you know, we can slam AoEs into a pile. We can AoE into this. We can root them in place. We have Raining Death. We have all this. All the stuff that I just hit right now, that's all AoE. This is AoE. And so now I've hit 4 different skills. These are all AoEs. We're going to hit a few more AoEs. We're going to hit our lightning reload here. And then we're going to hit another AoE. And so you see here, another AoE. And so a big portion of our current kit is AoEs. And I have an issue with that for a ranger because it just doesn't fit with stereotypically what a ranger is. And so when you look at the mage does AoE better. And when you think of mage archetypes, it makes sense, right? You know, other types of mages and other games and movies also have massive amounts of AoE. So it fits for what they're doing. But for a ranger, it just doesn't feel right? It doesn't look right. It's not something you're used to seeing. And I think that's where the current disconnect for me with the ranger archetype and overall what it should be. I would like to see it more heavily leaning into skill shots. I want to see it more leaning heavily into single target. Like if you're going to go a ranged style ranger where you're utilizing a bow and you're going around doing stuff, I think all of the single target stuff should look really cool. I don't have an issue you know, with lining this up. I don't have an issue with lining this up. Snipe has its place. You have all these different skills that work very well. This all can function as single target. Like all that is good. It's not bad, but I would like to see AoE spec'd into something to where you have a little bit more single target. We could have single target damages over time. You know, we could equip a single target ability like, you know, ESO's poison injection where you hit them with it and then they have a slow dot ticking on them. You could have a status effect like that. That's a single target ability. New World had a very good disengage ability where if somebody's in front of your face, you would jump backwards like 2 to 3 meters and then you'd hit them in the chest. They'd jump back 2 to 3 meters, and it was a disengage via doing damage with the bow. So you were using a skill shot to hit them, and if you hit them well, you got that distance to continue the fight, right? And so I'm not saying that that's what Ashes needs to do, but those are single target style skills that you can add to a ranger kit that would make it more single target specialized and more useful in that area. I'm not saying get rid of all the AoEs. I'm not saying that you even need to change the current kit or anything. It's just I have a hard time seeing what this ranger is supposed to augment later on for other classes. So if I went fighter ranger, what is the ranger providing me when I choose a fighter? I don't see the vision. Whereas if I go fighter rogue, I know I'm getting critical damage. I know I might be getting movement speed. If I get a cleric, I know I already said this, but I know I'm getting healing. When I get a tank, I know I'm getting mitigation. I don't know what I'm getting with the ranger. And so I think the issue is because its best skill is vines right now, it means either vines needs to be getting an adjustment, which probably is the case, or we need to have something more focused on, you know, buffing the overall archetype to have it have a really good identity. And so something they could do is they could have it have more base accuracy. This specific one, it could have more base accuracy to where it is, if people are running evasion, it doesn't miss as many shots. That's one of the passives that it could have. It could also, you know, it doesn't have to have a lot of mana sustain, but maybe it has more stamina sustain, so you can dodge roll a little bit more. I know there's already current passives when you're outnumbered, like you have a lot of stamina to dodge roll. What I'm saying is even before you're getting piled on by a bunch of people, having more stamina sustain potentially as a ranger would make a lot of sense, going off the endurance for what I was talking about earlier on. I think that would make sense that you could fit onto a ranger. Another one that I could see is there's not much of a difference in range that a ranger can do versus a mage or a rogue or anybody else with a bow. And literally everybody has a ranged ability. And so ranger doesn't even stand out from a ranged perspective relative to a bunch of other archetypes. And so I think that is also part of the issue is yes, there is a slight difference, but I think it could be a little bit more pronounced. I think leaning in on the ranger's ability to operate further away than a mage, operate further away than a fighter or a tank, even just a little bit further, considering the movement that you have with dodge roll jumps like this, you can get so much distance if you do it right. Having that kind of mobility is good. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, maybe in that state of the game, like having a little bit further distance would be effective too. And so then when you have your ranger archetypes, you could have it like, okay, I know that my skills have farther range. Even my melee abilities operate at farther range because I'm just so much more athletic. I'm able to lunge in a little bit more, so I can close the distance. These are all things that the Ranger archetype could be leaned on when you augment them later on down the road. Hey guys, we have editor no one here. I just wanted to briefly talk about something that I forgot to bring up when I was recording this video. I want to talk about Ranger movement as well. I'm not saying Ranger movement is bad, but when you watch the Ranger archetype live stream that they had 2 Decembers ago, they talked about how Ranger was going to be the second fastest archetype behind Rogue. And they talked about how it was going to be mobile and that's where it was going to kind of line up at. And when you look at different skills and abilities that they have, obviously you have this disengage, obviously you have this, and then you have built-in 10% movement speed. I haven't been on the PTR to specifically compare Ranger versus Rogue to see who's technically faster, but currently Bard is faster than Ranger in open world PvP on Alpha 2. So Bard is already faster, and if Rogue's faster, that puts it at 3. I would even contend that Mage's Blink right now is a better distance and evasion skill than anything that the Ranger currently has. And so all of a sudden, you're looking at a class that's supposed to hinge on this type of mobility, falling behind 2, maybe 3 of the 8 archetypes. And so it's more middle of the road in this department than it is being a specialized strength. And so I'm not saying that this needs to necessarily be adjusted. I'm probably saying that Bard speed needs to be dropped down. Like when I put on my mule and I put on a 10% movement speed buff, and my buddy that is not on a mount and he can keep up with me and we were literally running the exact same speed, maybe that's a little bit too fast. Maybe that's a little bit too fast for Bard specifically, and that specific aspect of their kit needs to be toned back. Can they still provide speed buffs? Absolutely. Can they still provide movement? Absolutely. Can they still provide healing, mana regeneration? Can they still provide literally every other fucking thing that they provide? Yes, but can Ranger have one of those things? Potentially. That's what I'm trying to say. Can Ranger be a little bit better in that specific department? Overall, I would say that the Ranger, minus the bugs, with its overall effectiveness in medium and large scale PvP, I give it a 7 or 8 out of 10. I think it's pretty good. I think it's very effective with vines. You could even say it's higher. Like if people are going to say it's higher, I can agree with you. A lot of the things holding it back are currently bugs, where if the bugs didn't exist, you could really see the vision. The bugs do exist, and so it kind of muddies a lot of those issues. But overall, as a kit, at level 25 at this base level, I want to see a little bit more direction personally. And so that's my perspective on the Ranger. If you guys have any questions or comments, please provide in the section below. Obviously, I just, it is a fun archetype. It looks cool. It's effective. I just want to see it like really stand out in its own way. It doesn't have to be more effective. That's not what I'm saying. I want it to lean into what Rangers normally lean into, whether it's endurance, mobility, or accuracy, precision, lethal single target focus. That's my personal opinion. So if you agree with me, cool. If you don't agree with me, let me know. We'll have a discussion. I'm gonna end this video here. If you guys have any questions or comments, please provide in the section below. I will do my best to answer them. As always, guys, thank you for watching. Have a nice day.